In the hustle and bustle of life, we often tend to blame our failures on our own thoughts, fears, doubts, and emotions, believing that the source of problems lies within ourselves. But what if the real danger lies not in the depths of our minds, but in the environment, in the places where we spend most of our time? Consider how often you mindlessly scroll through the news feed in the same room, visit the same building, communicate with the same people. Gradually, without realizing it, you begin to feel your energy draining away and memories of who you really are fade. And it's not about your weakness, but about the fact that some places have the ability to imperceptibly drain us of vitality. The famous psychologist Carl Jung argued that the human psyche is formed not only by internal experiences, but also by the external environment. There are certain environments, both visible and invisible, that can have a devastating effect on our minds. At first glance, this may be imperceptible, but over time you will feel your thoughts changing, your self-confidence fading, and your soul losing its luster. An exciting journey lies ahead, during which 7 dangerous places will be revealed, which, according to the teachings of Carl Jung, should be avoided. And the goal of this avoidance is not escape from life, but the protection of one's mental strength and the preservation of the integrity of the mind. After all, some places are capable of not only causing pain, but also changing us, distorting our personality. But how to recognize these dangerous places before they can cause irreparable harm? How to learn to identify which environments have a negative impact on us? The answers to these questions will be revealed later. Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychiatrist and pioneer of psychoanalysis, devoted his fruitful career to exploring those invisible forces that subtly shape our inner world. He did not strive for simple answers or hasty solutions. He was drawn to a deep immersion in the human soul, in the vast expanses of the unconscious, in the dark corners of the shadow, and in the archetypes that guide human behavior, often remaining unnoticed. One of his most striking discoveries was the understanding of how strongly we are influenced by the environment, often to a much greater extent than we can imagine. Remember moments from your life. Have you ever entered a room and immediately felt a depressing heaviness, as if the very air was pressing down on your shoulders? Has it ever happened that after a conversation you felt diminished, quiet and insecure, not understanding what caused this state? The problem is not always in people. Sometimes it's about the energy that permeates the space, the psychological burden it carries. Jung argued that certain places accumulate patterns, unconscious fields, woven from emotions, traumas, and unresolved energy. When we enter these fields, they begin to subtly and imperceptibly rewrite us. In his time, he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." These words contain a deep understanding of how subconscious forces, including the influence of the environment, shape our reality. It's not just about avoiding physical dangers, such as dark alleys. It is much more important to explore those psychological landscapes that, being real or symbolic, have a powerful impact on our thinking, feelings, and ability to maintain mental stability in the raging chaos of life. The first such landscape is the echo chamber, an environment where every surrounding voice seems to repeat your own. Here, opinions, beliefs, fears, and even shortcomings are reflected in an echo until they take root in the mind as an unshakable truth. The illusion of independent thinking arises, but is this really the case, or is a person simply repeating what he constantly hears around? Carl Jung, an outstanding thinker, warned about the dangers of collective thinking, which suppresses individual reflection. He argued that the true power of the mind is born from encountering oneself, and not from the comfort of uniformity. However, the echo chamber practically excludes such a meeting. It gives a false sense of confidence, imperceptibly depriving a person of the opportunity for personal growth and development. In the modern world, where social networks play a huge role, it is worth thinking about the content of your news feed. Do the accounts that a person subscribes to and the discussions in which he participates question his beliefs or simply reinforce already established views? In a situation where the echo chamber prevails, any deviation from the generally accepted point of view is perceived as a potential threat. Curiosity fades, thinking becomes ossified, And with it comes vulnerability, because everything new and unfamiliar begins to cause fear. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung viewed such a state as a kind of spiritual stagnation, where a person's psyche ceases to develop due to a lack of stimuli for growth. This phenomenon is not limited to the virtual space. An echo chamber can form within a circle of friends, in a classroom, and even at family gatherings where only certain opinions are welcomed. In such an environment, a person begins to feel safe, but safety is not always synonymous with health. It is important to ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened to ideas that caused discomfort and analyzed them? The strength of the mind lies not in infallibility, but in the willingness to admit one's mistakes and learn from them. The echo chamber stifles this growth process, trapping a person in a closed circle of their own beliefs. If you stay in it for too long, you can lose the ability to think outside the box. And having lost this ability, a person becomes vulnerable and can fall into a trap where despair hides behind external attractiveness. In a dynamic world where an individual's value is often determined by their conformity to accepted standards, a so-called arena of comparison arises. Here, every glance becomes an unspoken competition, and the achievements of others are involuntarily perceived as personal failures, creating the feeling that one's own successes pale in comparison to those of others. As Carl Jung astutely observed, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But what can be said about those unrealized opportunities and dreams with which we constantly compare ourselves, viewing the lives of others on social networks, often without realizing that we see only carefully selected moments, far from genuine reality? In the arena of comparison, a person does not just observe others, they absorb their lives, their habits, their time frames, their best moments, gradually adjusting their own life to their standards. This happens not out of a desire for joy and self-realization, but rather out of an instinctive desire to survive in this endless competition. Do you feel empty after achieving a goal you were proud of, simply because someone else achieved more, faster, more effectively? The arena of comparison weakens the mind, shifting the focus of attention outward. Instead of developing their uniqueness and individuality, a person begins to dissolve into the images of others, comparing their inner depth with the superficiality of others, their real life with the best moments of others, thereby losing their identity and uniqueness. Carl Jung emphasized the exceptional importance of individuation, the complex path of becoming a unique personality. However, in the modern world, where the cult of competition and conformity to accepted standards prevails, the process of individuation is often threatened. The desire to keep up with others, to prevail in an imposed struggle, forces people to abandon their uniqueness. The greatest danger is the constant comparison of oneself with others, which gradually distances a person from their true desires and needs. In this race, one's own values, the internal compass that points the way to happiness and the very joy of life, are lost sight of. Therefore, it is worth asking the question, is the life that a person aspires to truly their own, or was it borrowed from someone else? The true strength of the mind lies not in winning against comparisons, but in going beyond this senseless race. Only by leaving the arena where rivalry reigns does a person gain the ability to see the world clearly and realize their true goals. However, this enlightenment may be fleeting, especially when a person enters another space, the mask circle. In this place, where it is not necessary to compete, but it is necessary to perform, everyone is forced to put on a mask, presenting to the world only that version of themselves that looks acceptable, attractive, and impeccable. In the mask circle, appearance is valued above authenticity, sincerity seems risky, and vulnerability becomes an alien concept. Carl Jung often spoke of the persona, the social mask that people wear to meet the expectations of others. He did not argue that the persona is something unequivocally bad, but warned against the danger of forgetting that it is just a mask. If a person loses awareness of this fact, they risk merging completely with their persona, losing their own identity. Imagine a situation where a person feels an urgent need to suppress a part of their personality, adapting to the environment. Perhaps they are forced to laugh at jokes that do not seem funny to them or agree with statements that contradict their beliefs. They remain silent when their inner voice urges them to speak out. This is the so-called mask circle. Such an environment can arise in the workplace, in a circle of friends, or even in personal relationships where love and acceptance are conditional upon conforming to a specific image. At first glance, such behavior may seem like a harmless compromise. A person convinces themselves that it is easier to adapt this way. However, over time, this mask becomes increasingly rigid and unyielding. The longer they wear it, the more they distance themselves from their true essence. They stop questioning who they really are, feeling threatened and afraid to discover the truth. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung argued that true strength of spirit lies in the integration of personality, in bringing the shadow, hidden flaws, secret truths, and unsightly aspects to light. However, in a masked circle, anything that does not conform to the accepted image is ruthlessly banished into the darkness. Surely everyone is familiar with the feeling of emptiness after interacting with a certain group of people. This happens not because they have drained energy, but because of the need to constantly play a role, pretending to be someone you are not. Wearing a mask for too long leads not only to concealing the true self, but also to isolation from others and from oneself. This is the quiet tragedy. The more a person dissolves into the crowd, the more they lose their individuality, gradually disappearing as a person. At times, the process of fading begins not in the external world, but within the walls of one's own home, in the abode of silence. This is a place where love is seemingly implied, but rarely expressed in words. Here, feelings retreat beneath a thick layer of daily routine. Conversations skim the surface and silence becomes an unspoken law. From the outside, it may seem that stability and even peace reign here. However, deep down, a quiet erosion occurs, where emotional needs remain unmet, unexpressed, and ultimately unacknowledged. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, asserted that the emotional patterns we experience in early childhood form the foundation of our psyche. If these patterns are built in an atmosphere of silence and emotional vacuum, the result is not strength, but suppression. Suppressed emotions do not disappear without a trace. They merely retreat into the shadow, waiting for a moment of weakness to erupt. The question arises, have you ever had to live in a space where it is impossible to express your true feelings? Where openness met with resistance, ignorance, or misunderstanding? In such conditions, a person learns to keep everything inside, to force a smile when hurting, to cope alone instead of sharing their experiences. And this ability to cope becomes part of their personality. But it is important to understand that the ability to cope is not healing, and silence is not peace. In a quiet home, a person becomes a master of pretense, skillfully creating the illusion of well-being. But beneath this mask, the mind wages a constant battle between what it feels and what it is allowed to show. This dissonance is exhausting. It is difficult to gain mental strength when there has never been emotional security. Jung taught that healing begins with expression, with addressing one's inner world, not fleeing from it. But in a quiet home, the expression of feelings is seen as a sign of weakness. Vulnerability becomes taboo, and gradually the silence from the outside penetrates inward, filling the entire space of the soul. In this regard, it is worth asking yourself, when was the last time you felt truly heard without having to raise your voice? When was the last time your feelings were accepted and understood without judgment or criticism? Immerse yourself in the antithesis of silence, in a swirling vortex of external and internal stimuli, where even one's own thoughts drown in the cacophony. This is a chaotic space, a phenomenon far more common than it seems at first glance. Here, constant stimulation reigns, where senseless noise displaces deep reflection. Distractions pile up, erasing from memory the very concept of stillness. As Carl Jung astutely observed, looking outward begets dreams, while looking inward leads to awakening. But how is it possible to delve into one's inner world when one is insistently pulled in different directions from all sides? It is important to note that this space does not always have a physical embodiment. It can be mental, emotional. Modern life, overflowing with to-do lists, obligations, and constant background noise, muffles the inner voice. A person is constantly in motion, instantly reacting to external stimuli, always busy. Slowing down seems dangerous. Why? Because in silence, a truth that we are diligently avoiding may sound. Recall, has it ever happened that a day was filled with tasks not because of their importance, but because of the unbearable fear of being alone with one's thoughts? In a chaotic space, stillness becomes a threat, rest is perceived as laziness, and reflection is seen as a waste of precious time. However, the mind is not designed for an endless marathon. It needs rhythm, moments to absorb information, process it, and recover. Disrupting this rhythm inevitably leads to a loss of clarity in thinking. This all-consuming chaos not only depletes human resources but also fragments the personality, leading to distraction, loss of concentration, and increased irritability. In this hustle and bustle, it's easy to mistake frantic activity for real progress and informational noise for significance. However, as Carl Jung argued, true meaning lies not in speed, but in depth. Nevertheless, a chaotic environment convinces otherwise, luring with false urgency and ultimately leaving a feeling of emptiness. In this regard, the question arises, if silence suddenly fell, would you be able to recognize the voice of your own soul? Or would it sound foreign, like the voice of a stranger from the distant past? It is here, in the depths of the inner world, that the most insidious of all places takes root, the abandoned self. This is not a physical space, but a state that arises when a person ceases to listen to their needs, instincts, and inner truth. Self-denial does not happen instantly, but gradually, one compromise here, one ignored feeling there, until only a shell remains, a life that no longer reflects true essence. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious holds those aspects of personality that an individual rejects, suppresses, or fears. However, by rejecting these parts of oneself, one does not get rid of them. They manifest as anxiety, self-destructive behavior, and even physical ailments, reminding one of the need to restore integrity and return to oneself. There are moments in everyone's life when they have to act against their true desires. How many times have you had to agree when your inner voice desperately protested? How many times have you had to stay in an unloved job, in exhausting relationships, just to avoid the unpredictability of the future? Society often dictates its own conditions where convenience and stability are valued more than personal happiness and self-realization. People are taught to adapt to others' expectations to such an extent that they lose touch with their deepest needs and aspirations. The paradox is that many do not even realize they have fallen into this trap. They justify their choices with a sense of duty, the need to conform to accepted norms. But can this be called development if it requires the abandonment of one's own personality? As Carl Jung said, the process of individuation is a continuous path to finding one's true self. However, this path is impossible if you silence the inner voice that points the right way. Therefore, it is worth stopping and honestly asking yourself, when was the last time you listened to yourself and not to the opinions of others? Is there still a connection with your true self? Or was a piece of your soul given away in exchange for the illusion of belonging and recognition? The longer a person remains in a situation of self-denial, the more difficult it will be to return to their true self. However, even in the process of returning to oneself, there is a final obstacle that can hold a person captive to the past. This is a mysterious place, hidden behind the impregnable gates of the mind where few dare to look, the forbidden room. In this secret corner of the soul are stored repressed memories, unhealed wounds, buried emotions, everything that has been locked away because of its unbearable weight, agonizing shame, or all-consuming pain. As Carl Jung asserted, each individual carries a shadow, hidden, unconscious aspects of the personality that they stubbornly refuse to confront. But what is rejected and hidden in the dark does not remain indifferent. It grows, influencing behavior, relationships, and even self-perception. Surely everyone has experienced a disproportionately sharp reaction to minor irritants, wondering about the source of such strong emotions, or discovering that destructive patterns of behavior are repeated, from which it seemed possible to get rid of forever. This is the manifestation of the influence of the forbidden room, a place that is carefully avoided, but which nevertheless shapes all actions and decisions. The truth, well known to Jung, is that everything buried will sooner or later rise from the grave. The pain that is tried to be suppressed is transformed into the pain that is passed on to others. Avoidance does not erase the past, but only gives it more power. Many people live their lives in a state of constant alertness, fearing to encounter the unknown that lurks behind the closed door of their consciousness. However, such avoidance only strengthens the power of these fears. The shadows that one tries to ignore turn into shackles, limiting their freedom. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, asserted that true strength arises from integration, from bringing those hidden aspects of the personality into the light, acknowledging each truth individually. This process does not destroy, but on the contrary, makes a person whole. A logical question arises: which door in one's inner world does one avoid opening? And, more importantly, what part of healing awaits behind that door? Experience shows that people can find themselves in various places, both external and deeply hidden within themselves. Perhaps someone has wandered through an echo chamber, trying to find their voice, or languished in a silent house, yearning for understanding. Or perhaps a person has locked themselves in a forbidden room, hoping that no one will notice the pain that still lurks in its corners. Jung deeply understood that healing begins not with achieving perfection, but with awareness. And this awareness begins with naming what was once hidden. There is no need to run away from the world to protect one's mind. It is important to be more aware of where one is, what spaces one enters, what energy one allows into one's life, and what parts of oneself one is still afraid to face. Being strong in spirit does not mean being flawless. It means having the courage to give up what weakens you, even if that place has become familiar. The author wonders where exactly listeners have lingered longer than they should have, and what prompted the change. He encourages readers to share their stories in the comments, believing that personal experience can be the key to awareness for others. Perhaps someone's story will help someone else recognize themselves in a similar situation and make the necessary decision. The author also encourages sharing the publication if it evoked an emotional response. In conclusion, he emphasizes that personal growth and strength of character are formed not in the comfort zone, but in the process of making difficult but important decisions. It is choice that determines our destiny and tempers